You're about to listen to Julie in Genderland. Some of the names and voices you'll hear have been changed to protect the parents who spoke to us and their children. The whole series is available to download now, wherever you get your podcasts. Please listen, like, and share. My name's Julie Bindel. I'm a feminist. For 40 years, I've been campaigning on the issue of men's violence against women and girls. Now, a new front in that battle has opened up in the form of extreme transgender ideology, which says anyone can change sex. And men are women if they say so. And somewhere along the line, children have been caught up in this insanity. In this podcast series, I'm talking to some of the handful of brave individuals who stood up to this nonsense from the start.
The pain that this movement has caused is really indescribable, and we need to turn things around and turn things around very quickly.
In this episode, we're looking at what's been going on in schools. I'm meeting the young people and parents whose lives have been thrown into turmoil.
I can't move on until I know that my kids are safe from this ideology.
And other kids.
And other kids, yeah.
Welcome to Julie in Genderland.
So I'm Stephanie Davis-Arai. I founded Transgender Trend in 2015, and I got involved through my work with parents and teachers. So I've been working with parents and doing teacher training courses for over 20 years. So I came to this subject through that route, through mainly parenting, and not through anything really political.
Do you remember the first time you ever heard of the transitioning of children?
No, I don't remember the first time. It crept up quite gradually, but I do remember that it was all stories of very little children being transitioned in primary schools. I remember reading something about a school in Nottingham where a little boy had come back in as a girl and had been celebrated. And I remember that really hitting me. That was accepted as a good and right thing to do, when for me it was an immediate red flag that all of the adults in the school were telling this little boy he was a girl, and that to me was so obviously wrong.
Our middle was being introduced to the new RSHP lessons, which in primary 6 is when they explicitly tell them that sex is a sign of birth. You can be any boy or girl you want. It's possible you're born in the wrong body. All of these things.
2 of Anne's daughters started believing they were boys. They are both autistic.
We've since found out that autistic puberty is really different to neurotypical, and they have a really difficult time. So it seemed like an answer for them of why they were feeling out of sorts and why things were weird and complicated, rather than just realizing that it was puberty. They were being flooded with all these hormones and there was all these changes happening. They were told it was because they were probably boys. So that kind of stuck for them.
I worked in a primary school for 8 years from 2020, and I saw a similar thing. So the trans thing hadn't got there yet, although it was beginning in secondary schools, because my daughter, who was 15 at the time, had a group of friends, or she knew of, I think, 3 girls who were planning their double mastectomies. This was she was in secondary school.
When she started sixth form, I said to her, "What are you wearing? You've got no shape."
This is Paula.
And she kind of pulled away. And that's when I thought, that seems odd, because I had no idea really about any of this stuff. I kind of had a look through a room and I found she'd got a binder and tape. I found schoolwork and books with a different name on. I immediately got in touch with the school, went in for a meeting. They claimed They hadn't been aware of the binder. But they did admit that she'd asked to be called a different name at the start of the school year, that she'd gone to a teacher she doesn't normally interact with, and she was supported by her friends. They didn't tell me they'd also changed her pronouns. They advised me to just wait until she was ready to talk.
When I started Transgender Trend, in those early years, I spent a lot of the time emailing with parents and talking on the phone to parents. So I heard a lot of stories right back then of parents who, and these were parents mostly of older children, the teenage years. And I heard a lot of stories about this, what schools were doing then in the UK, because previously I'd been in touch with parents from Canada and the US and so I heard what was going on there. But this was in the UK, real life stories of parents being reported to social services for not affirming their daughter as a boy. And that time, it was the parents who contacted me, I would say that around 75–80% were parents of girls who thought they were boys.
Many of the parents I've spoken to only discovered by chance what their children were being taught, like Jane.
During lockdown, I walked in on a lesson being taught. It must have been a PSHE lesson where the children were being polled on whether they thought the age for consent to puberty blockers should be lowered. And these were like 15-year-old kids. I mean, just shocking. And I wrote to the school and I wanted to know whether Mermaids or Stonewall had driven this, and they would not answer. I didn't know how, at that point, how to put in an FOI.
So you actually walked in on that lesson?
Well, the weird thing is she called me in. So on one level, maybe unconsciously, she was wanting some protection, because I wondered whether they had singled her out as the potentially trans-identified kid in the class, or whether that's a blanket thing they rolled out across the school.
And then what the school did when you, no doubt, endlessly complained or asked questions of them?
Well, usually they just ignored me, like when they hosted Pride events, or, you know, I'd ask who are the invited speakers, all that kind of thing, and try and just keep her off during those days. I mean, at her later school, that's where they socially transitioned her behind my back, and that I found out about completely by accident. When they left a message on the wrong phone, and also a few emails from them would use first person plural instead of she her, and I thought, is that just bad grammar, or, you know? And I once I had picked up that they had actually changed her name, that's when I went head to head with them, and I got some help from Transgender Trend, which was sort of invaluable.
So explain to us, if you would, Stephanie, about rapid onset and this kind of, what some people would call the social contagion model. How did this come about and how is it different?
It's a learned condition. I think trans is the first global social contagion. But if you look at the pattern of social contagions throughout history, what's happening now fits that model much more closely than it fits the model of the historic gender dysphoric group, who were largely boys and developed a cross-sex identity in early childhood, and very few. It was an incredibly rare thing. So at the Tavistock, it was around 50, less than 50 a year that would be referred to the Tavistock. Most, I'm sure you know the history of this, but most of those boys would turn out to be gay as adults. So that was the model, the presentation of gender dysphoria. It started in early childhood, it affected mostly boys. Now it starts predominantly after puberty and affects mostly girls. Now that's similar to something like Tourette's, the tics syndrome that started during COVID. Every social contagion girls, teenage girls, are particularly susceptible. But, you know, tics also is predominantly boys, predominantly starts in early childhood. And yet, during COVID, when girls were online more than usual, it affects teenage girls after puberty. So the trans thing fits that model of social contagion if we looked at all of the factors much more closely than it fits the model of gender dysphoria and the children who would grow up to be a minority of them, around maybe to 20% would become transsexual as adults. And also those transsexual adults would be gay transsexuals. So this is completely different to that. And I think it has exploded at the same rate as social media has exploded and the teaching in schools. So in 2015, it was the trans inquiry, Maria Miller's inquiry. And I remember seeing an article in the Daily Mail about what Gender Identity Research and Education Society, GIRES, were promoting, and they had produced themselves 3 books called Being Me in Penguin Land. One was boy to girl, one was girl to boy, and one was non-binary. And I bought these books, and they were the first trans books aimed at little children. Now we have over 60 books for early years and primary schools, over 60 picture books. And the difference, so people were talking now about the government saying gender identity ideology should not be taught in schools as fact, are saying, crying Section 28 all over again. Well, I think gender identity ideology is the new Section 28. You get a child before they've developed their sexuality, before they've developed their sexual orientation. I'm talking sexual orientation now. I know a lot of people say, oh, I knew I was gay when I was 5. No, you didn't. You had attractions and intense attractions towards people. You did not understand them as sexual at that age. So you get gender in before sex, and you convince that child that they are trans, they're not gay, they're really that little boy, boy who's overwhelmingly likely to grow up to be gay. Not all of them, some grow up to be heterosexual, they're just, but you get them early and they think they're little girls, and they believe that because that's their stage of development. Of course they believe it. It's a stage of a 4 to 5 year old. So I think the number, I haven't even counted the number of books. I stopped counting for the older years and the teenage years, and now the young adult books that are published. They're in every bookshop. There have been bidding wars in children's publishing. The first book that I was aware of that a large publisher published, Bloomsbury, was 2016. It was introducing Teddy, and that one that's now used in the No Outsiders programme and all sorts. So I think we can't just say, oh, which I hear people say a lot, oh, young people know a lot more about, they're so much more sophisticated than us and they know about gender. This is all part of adults abdicating responsibility and following the child as if the child has some magical knowledge, or this is an organic development amongst young people who are so much more progressive than us. No, it's not. It's learned, it's been taught, children have been bombarded, and the adolescents are the ones who've been bombarded with this on social media, across the internet, by lobby groups, and then in schools. So you get a month of pride celebrations, you get flags all over the classroom, you get posters up, it's a constant indoctrination into this idea of having an internal soul, which is your authentic self. This is how it's sold to children. This is your authentic self. This is the real you. Your sex, your biological sex, that was just assigned to you at birth. It's got nothing to do with you. But this is your real self. And that's a message that, and I've looked at the age group of the books, how those messages are really targeted at each age group. So in the younger years, it's all about friendship and being nice and accepting your friend for whoever they are, boy or girl, doesn't matter. A good friend would be, and it taps into children's need to be accepted and not to be bullied, or how painful it is when a friend falls out with you. It really taps into childhood needs. And then in the teenage years, all about you're searching for identity, you're searching for who you are, you're developing from a child into an adult. So all the books are about finding the real you. They're like self-help books, but the gender version. So yeah, to say how and why did this happen, or to see it as a sort of natural thing. No, it's been the total brainwashing of a generation.
And why? Why would these trans activists want children to become convinced they were born in the wrong body?
I think they need children to prove the theory that you are born with an innate sense of your so-called gender. So Stonewall said evidence shows that children develop their gender identity between the ages of 2 and 3. Now, child psychologists, I think they did sometimes use that term gender identity, but it was using gender to mean sex, and gender is often used to mean sex. Sex is never used to mean gender, but gender means masculine or feminine. That's the basic meaning of gender. Boys and girls are not two genders, they're two sexes. But the word gender is often substituted in the literature about children. So children developing a gender identity at age 2 to 3 simply means that children understand whether they're boys or girls by the age 2 to 3. And so, but if you can turn that to mean that children have a gender identity so young, before sort of pre-socialization almost, very early, then that helps to prove the theory that we are born with an innate sense of our own gender. And that's so strong that it overrides your biological sex, and it's what makes you a boy or a girl, man or a woman. So I think the children have been used as political pawns in an adult social justice movement.
And some parents have had enough.
I'm a mum of 2 teenagers.
Jill lives in the Essex town of Chelmsford.
And I've become quite active in actually really looking into how the organisations in my area work, where the funding comes from. I kind of watch the money go around as well between these organisations, sort of local councils, the big public funders, particularly National Lottery, Arts Council England, etc. I see a lot of money flowing into this kind of sector.
So tell me about the organisations that showcase trans identities, however you want to put it. Are there many of them?
There is a charity called The Outhouse. It's a well-established charity. I think it's been going for about 29 years, and it's a bit like Stonewall in that it once was. It started off as a gay switchboard. It's evolved over the years, and it's really focused on children now. So it still has the adult aspect of it. It's still got the adult groups, but the children is where the funding is, really. So they've had, £531,000 of just from National Lottery funding recently. And there have been questions asked, actually. There was a newspaper article in the Daily Telegraph about them a few months ago about what they said on their website about puberty blockers. This was after puberty blockers had been banned. They were still saying they were reversible on their website, etc., etc. And people do notice that kind of thing. People notice the kind of children, it is overwhelmingly the autistic children, and their business model is predicated on affirmation. They've built it around keeping these children, you know, that you come into a club, you get treated like you're really special. These kids are desperate for acceptance, and they get it, and they get, you know, what some people might call love bombed, if you like.
If we were to play devil's advocate and look
Yeah.
at what some of these organisations
Yeah.
that have contact with children, for example, in various things, whether it's youth groups, whether it's schools or whatever.
Yeah.
Some would argue that all that they are doing is helping kids that have told them, so they have actually expressed themselves prior to any indoctrination, that they have said they feel trapped in the wrong body, or they feel distressed about their sexed body, that they feel that they're gender dysphoric, or whatever words kids would
Yeah.
use. And that all they're doing is trying to offer clarity, they're trying to offer some kind of support and way through this difficulty for the child, as opposed to imposing their ideology on them. What would you say to that?
We know from the CAST review and from the records from the Tavistock report, etc., just how many of these children who are identified as trans are actually really vulnerable. And if you're, you know, if you've got a vulnerable child who's on the autistic spectrum, for example, or has got, you know, many of the other comorbidities that were identified by those reports, you want to know if your child's identifying as trans. That's really, it's really important. And of course, the CAST review says that, you know, parents should be involved. You know, the keeping children safe in education guidance has been updated, you know, along the same lines. It's really clear that parents need to know that, because parents are first and foremost the people who need to safeguard children. It's their responsibility.
Got to Christmas, she still wouldn't talk to me. The school said, oh yeah, she said she'll talk to you over Christmas, but she'll get Christmas out of the way first.
Paula struggled to get straight answers from her daughter's school.
Nothing was happening. The heads invited us to talk to the safeguarding lead, and I think the head of year, and it took us about 4 emails, getting more and more threatening for him to actually attend the meeting.
Why was he reluctant? Did he say?
No, I think he just washes his hands of everything and just delegates. And he just said, oh, well, you know, that's more, you've got senior leaders there. That's more than we would normally allocate for meeting a parent. You know, I don't need to be involved. And we said, I think you do. This is a safeguarding issue. So when we turned up at 9 o'clock, we were left waiting for half an hour. And I think it's because he'd suddenly realised maybe he ought to see what was going on. And I think the staff were filling him in before they spoke to us. They admitted that they'd changed her name and her pronouns. They told us that their legal advice was that they didn't need to tell us. They admitted that she'd asked for a different name, but they did not mention pronoun change when I first spoke to them and expressed my concerns. I was feeling sick, basically. Absolutely, still am fuming with the school for what they did. They refused to change her name or pronouns back unless my daughter herself asked for them to do that. That evening when we made her tell us what was going on, we basically insisted that she'd change her pronouns back, which she did. But when we said to school she's agreed to change her pronouns back, they said, well, we'll have to check with her.
The parents of the autistic boys that contacted me were, I think, more beside themselves, because they would say to me, well, my son has an obsession with something, and it generally lasts around 4 years, each obsession, and then it goes, and then it's replaced by another obsession. So the current obsession is gender. Now, if that lasts 4 years, he's on puberty blockers. When they talk about the rush to get kids onto puberty blockers from the trans side, is because they will then be on the medical pathway. They will then transition. They will become trans as adults. It's a done deal once they're on blockers. For the parents who don't want their kids to have this experimental medication, time is also of the essence. It's why there's a lot of talk about, a lot of people understand that you shouldn't socially transition little kids, because of course they haven't even achieved that developmental stage of sex constancy yet. The teenage years are just as critical, because they are at the age where they will be getting, or certainly before PASS, they would be on their way to getting blockers very quickly if they were diagnosed with gender dysphoria. So it's really critical the way time is very short. It is urgent to get right the way that we treat the teenagers.
We're going to hear from two fathers now who faced just this urgency. First, Nick, whose son declared himself transgender.
I was trying to find out where he'd got the idea about what being transgender was and where he got it from. And after a lot of digging, he said to me that some people had come into school somewhere around the beginning of year 5. So I believe that's when he would have been 9.5 to 10. And they'd said to him that, and again, this is him paraphrasing and remembering a conversation or a presentation that was a good 18 months ago, but he'd said that some people had come in and they'd said that there are some people in the world who don't feel like they belong, don't feel like they fit in, feel like there's a group over there and you're over here, and you know you're not part of the gang. So and that those people are transgender people. As far as I can see, they didn't present that information in a holistic and wide way. They didn't say that there is neurodiversity and different people think about things in different ways, and some people fit into a group and some people don't fit into a group. You know, some people are autistic, some people are ASC, some people have got ADHD, some people are neurodivergent in all sorts of other ways. Instead, no, they seem to have gone, oh yeah, all of those things that you feel, all of those, let's face it, quite normal and human things to feel, especially when you're going into puberty, especially when you're getting ready to go up to secondary school, a big step in your life. And they just said, yeah, those people are trans. And that's it. So he's come home from school with no wider context about this, no education about what other, and I say a spectrum of neurodiversity he could be fitting into. And he's just come home and he said he's trans. And he sat with that for a good 18 months before he's brought it to me. What a cross to bear. I'm so angry about that. I'm so angry that the school would give them that information in a vacuum and not support their children. There's 90 kids in a year there, 90, right? So the whole school, I don't know, 1,000 kids, and they've just dumped this information on them and just left it. And it is shocking how the safeguarding has been omitted, left, right, and centre. Not to mention the fact that they've just said there's just this one thing that you are, and it's transgender. I can't think of another clear reason why there has been an explosion in the number of self-identifying transgender children, other than the information coming in from ideologues who have an agenda and are trying to push it, and the social contagion of children being children.
Simon's son was at boarding school.
He'd always had people he would chat to online, and in lockdown he sent a message to his matron at school saying that he was talking to someone online. He was 15 at this point, 15 and a half, talking to someone online, and they said, it sounds like you have gender dysphoria. And the matron, in my view, should have immediately raised a safeguarding, but she did not. Then, his messages to her about, I never bought him the girls' uniform. The staff at the school arranged the girls' uniform. That was, and I could see from the messages, that was something that was going to happen with or without my permission. I felt strong-armed into just allowing social transition at school. I've been trying to do everything I can to, like I was sending the school the CAS interim report, and they said to me, don't worry, we won't make a fuss. It won't be special at all, it'll be... But everyone in the house was enthusiastically the special, making him feel amazing in the girls' uniform, in the girls' sports teams. I said to the school, I can't take getting these emails that you're so enthusiastically sending me, referring to my son as she and her, and with this new name he's invented. He's had several names. When you give these 16-year-old boys the blockers, you don't get a girl, you get a 16-year-old boy who's actually 18. Like legally 18, like once I get to 18, they still look 16. And what is the point in that? Photography. And that is what happens to them. They go, oh, really? You're 18. Hey, let's exchange some photos.
So in other words, they are legally adults,
Yeah.
physically children,
Yeah.
and this appeals to predators.
Yeah, yeah. And in Europeans, or European men, the last 2 years, the 16, 17, 18, that's when we get a final growth spurt and androgenize really quite severely sometimes, like really angular, and I did. And he hasn't gone through that. He hasn't had his little last growth spurt. I grew another 2 inches.
I mean, he looks like a boy.
Yeah, yeah.
He doesn't look like a man.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, and he's 19 now. He'll be 20 this year. Doesn't? Yeah, exactly.
No, he looks like a child.
Yeah. He was desperate to get these drugs. So he had a series of emails. They said, you must have some counselling. So he had to pay for that himself, and that was a 1-hour session, I believe, with gendered intelligence. And that was after they'd already sent him the drugs, though, which was 3 months worth of finasteride, estrogen and progesterone, about 300 pills in all, I think. And they were free, the first lot.
Why?
Because his parents were transphobic and he didn't have any money.
Right, so the analogy about drug dealers is perfect, isn't it? Because my experience with working with very traumatised and abused women, particularly in prostitution, is that they are given heroin free until they're hooked.
Yeah.
And then it's on the street
Yeah.
to make the money to pay the drug dealer who's also a pimp.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's the same model. Yes. It's the same model.
When did you first discover that he was using puberty blockers?
My neighbour, she spotted it like months before I did.
Physical,
yeah. I just thought he's not eating right, too much sugar, getting puffy, something like that. And she spotted, but his mother and I were so certain. We had this agreement in writing with the school.
What was happening when he was at school?
He'd done quite well in his GCSEs, and then he was falling to pieces, I thought, at school. He tried to get himself into the girls in the girls' house were groomers as much as anyone else. Come over, we'll do your makeup and put you in a dress. He tried to get into one of the girls' houses at the school. They said to him, we're not sure this is the place for you. So he had to be at this co-ed boarding school, and he had to be in the boys' house, and they all said, you're in a boys' house, but you are a girl. She, her, and all that kind of stuff.
Then why did they put him in the boys' house if they really do believe
Right,
this
yeah,
stuff?
they don't really believe it, do they?
What's always been chilling to me in this is the presentation of something so wrong and so inhuman, presented as kindness and compassion.
And have you developed any further understanding of why this is? Where does this come from?
I think it comes from a lot of things coming together. I could give lots of reasons. I could give sort of political reason of shame over not paying attention to gay rights quickly enough, that sort of homophobia. So a guilt, a collective guilt about that. And so, trans is just the same as that. Let's go for that straight away. Let's not make the same mistake again. You can look at the whole development of the trans movement and the global and very highly funded movement, and the really direct targeting of children as a part of that ideology that was very necessary for them.
In Scotland, Anne and Graham's wishes as parents were overruled by their daughter's school.
We didn't know that the school had changed their pronouns. We didn't want them to do that. We never asked them to do it. When we found out that they had done that, it took us a very long time to stop it, to have it rolled back. And our support teacher agreed. She said that, they could use they, them, which was some sort of compromise as well. We were always having to compromise, but we didn't want to. I didn't want it to be that. I wanted it going straight back to what what she bloody is.
The teachers, any meeting, there would be really two themes to it. One would be, oh, yes, yes, we'll be professional and listen and sound like we're listening anyway, but we can only do what the policy is. It's come down from the local authority itself has come down from the Scottish government. It's not up to us.
We'd had a bit of an upset and drama with the eldest when she revealed that the whole of the school still was using he, him pronouns, even though we'd asked them not to. So, but by that time, she was about to leave anyway. She only had like a month or two left. So when I spoke to her pupil support teacher, who was the same one, because we made sure that she had this, we specifically said we need the same pupil support teacher all the way through. You're not changing it, because they wanted to change it. We want the same pupil support teacher. We need that continuity. They know my girls. She knows them. And she was one of the only supportive teachers, really. She tried really hard to keep them grounded in reality by using their real names and pronouns and what have you. But she also had to use the preferred name as well.
I think I think she was very brave, the support teacher, because I think the teachers either are woke themselves and really want to push it, or they can't speak up because they know this policy's come down and it could be big trouble for them. It's the opposite of sort of a progressive society where people can't, teachers can't be open, psychologists can't bring their own knowledge and thoughts. Everything's pushed to the back because this
safeguarding's thrown out the window.
This massive steamroller's there, and it will squash them flat, and they'll lose their jobs if they dare even question it. You know, years ago you might have been, I don't know, a goth or whatever it was, and a rebel, and your parents might have hated it, but it didn't have. There were two very separate factors now compared to what they were then. One is you didn't have people then telling you. I mean, I suppose cults did, but they go online, they have access to people telling them, this is what you say to your parents, this is how to get away from it. These are extra things that can dig you deeper into it. The goths didn't have the danger of then, you know, having their skin bleached white or their eyes taken out or whatever it was. There was no
their hair flattened,
there's no permanent
straight.
dangers. You know, the biggest worry was you didn't fit in, but eventually you'd come through it and you'd grow up and, you know, go off and get a job or whatever, and you'd have this colourful period or black and white period in your history. But now our big worry is that danger that they'll be sucked in and medicalised, and then they'll have lifelong changes.
It's a whole generation. They don't.
Some of the kids who are gay now, there's still some kind of stigma for the kids about being gay when there wasn't a few years ago. It's come back, but being trans is no stigma, and it's easier. It's easier to switch over and be, instead of a girl, be a gay man. I can't work it out. It's so complicated.
Well, I want to ask you about that because it's a valid point that you've made, and I agree with you entirely.
I think for the kids, it's better to be trans than to be gay. And if you want to really fit in, you're better being trans. And on the outside, you look like this much more colourful thing again instead of,
I don't know.
It's just, and it's a real shame. We've not even been that forceful about it in people's faces, but it's
only recently I've gone to the school and the primary school, and I said, you have to get this out. We've had a meeting about it, and there's another one coming up asking them, because it's not mandatory for primary schools, and thankfully they're not on the LGBT charter, so they don't have to pay for accolades. So I don't know. Hopefully they'll take heed. I send them stuff all the time to try and keep them up to date with what's going on. I rarely get responses. Definitely not from the high school. But I can't move on until I know that my kids are safe from this ideology.
And other kids.
And other kids, yeah. Our youngest, we pulled her out of these classes. She doesn't go to them, but she's about to go to high school where it's probably going to be exploded on her. It's just, we feel so helpless because there's bigger
fish.
there's bigger fish above us that are
and
ruining us.
also, you are so maternal and care about all children, not just our children. You worry about other people's children, and you know, you've always been in a very much of a network of mums and helping other mums, and you know,
Yeah,
we had the rights of the child in the wall literally from the kids were babies.
you have to hold stuff back. You can't properly parent by giving your opinion about things and teaching them. They've already been taught and boxed.
It feels like, let's say we were parents of the generations that went away to war, and we know, okay, our child is going to war. He may come back, he may not come back, he may come back with injuries.
Who do you blame for this?
It's hard to find, it's like an Agatha Christie murder, isn't it? Everyone put a knife in.
It's been quite devastating, really. I've heard so many horror stories from other parents where the kids go off to university and after a term they're on testosterone. And I'm just terrified as to what being in that environment will do to her. I think she's extremely vulnerable.
I think a lot of us have experienced not, or being careful about introducing this subject to people we don't know, because we don't know how they're going to respond. And it's a constant stress in relationships. But for parents, when you're so intimately involved and it's your own child, I think the harm it's causing for parents who can't speak, don't dare say anything, including to medical staff, education teachers, because they're afraid of being called a bigot. And how distressing that is, actually, when you're everything's reversed. Everything in this black and white world, everything's reversed, isn't it? The men are women are men, black is white, up is down, compassionate is bigot. The thoughtful parents, the caring social worker who thinks about these issues in terms of child development, safeguarding, reality, are the ones who are being vilified as bigots. And for parents, I think it's incredibly distressful to be called a bigot. Actually, it's to be accused of something, of a crime you didn't commit. You feel helpless. You try and justify yourself or explain yourself, and you're meeting hostility and people who don't believe you, who are determined to paint you as some evil. But parents usually, when children in the teenage years, there are many things that their child could get involved in. There's drugs, alcohol, sex. There's all sorts of worries for parents of teenagers. But if they do get involved with the wrong crowd or they go off the rails a bit, society helps parents by setting limits as a society. And now in this one area, society doesn't. In fact, society as a whole cheerleads those teenagers into medical intervention.
I would kill for my child any day, anybody, under any circumstances. They are my number one thing when I wake up in the morning and when I go home at night. So if somebody says to me, and I trusted them, if it's a doctor or a teacher or a psychiatrist, they said, well, you can either have a dead son or a live daughter, right? Well, of course you do. Of course you do. Until you look a little bit underneath this and you go, that's a lot of shit. That's crap. That is absolute crap. But that is a lie that is peddled to parents every single day in this town, in this country, on the internet, worldwide. It is shameful that people are making decisions based on garbage. Children need proper holistic support for their mental health. They do not need to be medicalised and categorised and go, yeah, that's it. Just you take a few hormones and later on we'll cut your dick off and then you'll be happy. What sort of a thing is that to say? What happened to do no harm?
You've been listening to Julie in Genderland. The whole series is available to download now, wherever you get your podcasts. Please listen, like and share.